first thought was that he lied in every word, that hoary cripple with malicious eye, askance to watching the workings of his lie, on mine, and mouth scarce able to afford suppression of the glee that pursed and scored, its edge at one more victim gained thereby. What else should he be set for with his staff? What save to waylay with his lies and snare all travelers who might find him posted there, and ask the road I guessed what skull-like laugh would break, what crutch gin write my epitaph for pastime in the dusty thoroughfare. If at his counsel I should turn aside, and to that ominous tract which all agree hides the dark tower yet acquiescently, I did turn at as he pointed, neither pride nor hope rekindling at the end descried, so much as gladness that some might in. Welcome to the People's History of Horror podcast. My name is Aaron.
I'm Mike. So, the fuck was that you just read?
That was the beginning of Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came by Robert Browning. It's a poem from the 19th century, and it inspired someone named Stephen King to write this book that we're covering today. It's called The Gunslinger.
Oh, okay, The Gunslinger. The men in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. So begins Book 1 of Stephen King's iconic fantasy series, The Dark Tower. Part sci-fi, part futuristic dystopia, part spaghetti western, and part high fantasy vision. The Gunslinger tells the story of Roland Deschain, Midworld's last gunslinger, who's tracking an enigmatic magician known only as the Man in Black. Following his quarry across the demon-infested Mohaine Desert, Roland confronts a mad preacher woman and her murderous flock, holds palaver with a speaking demon, and finally befriends a young boy from our world named Jake Chambers. Jake joins Roland on his quest, but while Roland travels with his young companion Jake, the Man in Black travels with Roland's soul in his pocket.
The Gunslinger, this is one of the earliest things, actually, that Stephen King wrote, which is, I guess, where we'll kind of begin here, is I don't want to get too deep into the Dark Tower lore that's past this, because we're going to come back to all of what we cover today multiple times through all these other books that we cover. This is the second book on our Stephen King reading list, and so obviously we're going to reference this over and over again. But as far as this book, this begins a whole multiverse of witches and wizards and all sorts of demons of various kinds, and
there's kind of a multiverse before it was cool, but it's the beginning of what actually ties his whole universe together, really.
I mean, obviously we started with Salem's Lot, so all of this, like I said, ties together, but what I want to do is kind of just look at The Gunslinger, this one book by itself, and kind of the way like a first-time reader coming to Stephen King would look at it and what they would get out of it. Obviously, we're tainted with all of this extra knowledge and having read all these other things, and we know what comes after this, but let's try to analyze this from as objective a standpoint as we can, and that would be beginning with the fact that it's a fix-up novel. It's actually 5 separate short stories. It obviously tells one bigger story, but...
Wasn't it published in a magazine over the course of 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, it was the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, which is a long-standing publication, but it was 5 stories, and it was over that 3-4 year period there, and this would have been 1978 to 1981 is when it was started being published, but he started writing it in 1970, so that's like a 12-year stretch, 12 and a half year stretch of writing this one book and revising it, because obviously the 82 novel edition is slightly changed from the short story version. And then years later, when he was finishing up the series, he put out a revised edition in 2003 to kind of make it a little more stand in with the rest of it.
Which is the one we will be reviewing today.
Yeah, where we're going with the canon version, the 2003 version. We'll cover as we're going along some of the stuff that's different, but if you go and try to buy this and read it, it's going to be the 2003 version anyways, so that's the one we're going to kind of analyze and go over today. So basically what I want to do with this book is kind of make it easier to go along. We'll just break it up into the 5 parts. And so the first part is an easy one because it basically just introduces the 2 characters. Like that opening line, the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. That's basically this book right there. Yeah. And so let's start there. Especially this first part, that's what it is. And so we got the gunslinger. You mentioned the name Roland in that little synopsis there at the beginning, but you don't really get that name but maybe 1 or 2 times in this entire book, that's cool. It's mostly in the flashback series, and so let's just talk about that. Let's talk about the title character, the gunslinger. We know, having read further, is his name is Roland Deschain, but I believe in the original version it's barely mentioned at all, other than a flashback. But so that's an interesting fact that he is distinguished as his title, the gunslinger. And so, what's a gunslinger?
Well, the gunslingers were, I guess my best description would be, they're kind of like the Arthurian Knights, this order of knights, but cowboys.
I mean, yeah.
Just, again, I'll bring this up, Warriors of White. You heard me bring that up in our, review of Salem's Lot.
Yeah, that's gonna come up again.
They're they're just warriors for good, an order of them. But yeah, they're cowboys, they're gunslingers. Man, they're.
I mean, it really is kind of like. I mean, it even mentions Arthur Eld, so there is an Arthurian bent to all of this, and later on we'll get into other novels that's covered even more, so we can dig into that. But he's Roland Deschain of Gilead, and so Gilead is the city that he grew up in, he was raised in, and that's kind of the capital of a land called New Canaan, which biblical term. So if you know anything about that, you can kind of get the vibe of what's going on there. But it's like you get his background, his backstory, and having grown up in that town later on, it's just kind of referenced here at the beginning, but that it keeps mentioning the phrase that the world has moved on. And so like this whole Arthurian lords and ladies of the castle thing that he grew up around, that's gone. That's
like, they're all I'm assuming they're all dead, because it states he's the last gunslinger. So, you kind of get the vibes from him that you don't just quit,
Yeah, like, so you can definitely tell, like, just from, well, let's kind of talk about the actual world that's being shown here at the beginning. It discusses how this is the apotheosis of all deserts, and King likes that word. That's a word that comes up again later, like, and it's the apotheosis of all summers. Like, he likes that word. But let me just read this little second paragraph here after the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. It was, like I said, the desert was the apotheosis of all deserts, huge, standing to the sky for what looked like eternity in all directions. It was white and blinding and waterless, and without feature save for the faint, cloudy haze of the mountains which sketched themselves on the horizon, and the devil grass which brought sweet dreams, nightmares, death. An occasional tombstone sign pointed the way, for once the drifted track that cut its way through the thick crust of alkali had been a highway. Coaches and buckets had followed it. The world had moved on since then. The world had emptied. So he says the world had emptied, which is basically helping describe the desert like this is just a vast wasteland.
Yeah.
And later on, he mentions that like where he is in the desert, there's like nothing for miles and miles in every direction, which is he's basically in an emptiness, which is an interesting way to start an epic journey for one thing.
Yeah, it's pretty bleak looking. Like the picture he painted, it's not pretty. But I'm gonna be real. Give me some of that devil grass, or what is it?
The devil grass is the devil grass. Like so let's move on in the story. He runs into this guy Brown, which is he's a desert dweller.
Brown, my dude.
He's a desert dweller, which is interesting that like his name is Brown, which kind of fits into his surroundings. Like it's just another dull, like not. Yeah, and he is not too bright himself, but
dirty.
Like everything, like waterless. He mentioned, and like the Brown has him. Like if you need to piss or spit or whatever, like do it into my corn.
The crops.
He's just got a bunch of corn, and then there's Zoltan, which is a fun character.
Zoltan is his bird. You remember what kind of bird it was?
It's a raven.
A raven. Yes. I forgot. Yeah, Zoltan was Brown's raven, and Zoltan had a couple he spoke. He had a couple phrases. Beans, the magical fruit.
It's the musical fruit.
The musical fruit. Yeah, whatever. The more you eat it, the more you toot.
Which is like another strange example. Like clearly, this is not our world from a lot of the language and lore that's being used and just the story that's being told. But then there are little things like that are super familiar, and you know we've all heard that phrase before, and his other phrase, which is was it "fuck you" and the horse you rode in on, or whatever?
Yeah. Yes, that's what it was.
And so I just kind of want to highlight that and we get several familiar things going on. Like later on, we're gonna hear "Hey Jude," the Beatles song, and so these are familiar things on a super alien background, which is it draws you in, but it, like you're also just like, what the fuck the whole time you're reading is like, I don't know what world this is, what's going on, because if you kind of get the Western flavor, and you kind of get the like clearly this is an epic, like it feels like you're reading some kind of epic story. Like the Gunslinger's clearly a mythical figure, and he's meant to be. You can tell that reading the whole book that he's meant to be this, mysterious mythical figure, which is, I guess we can get into that next as kind of before we move forward with the story too much. Get into some of the background and like what genre is this? What kind of story are we reading here? And what are your initial impressions, getting into the book? And you mentioned the beginning when you were reading that synopsis thing of all the different genres, because like I said, like what genre is this supposed to be? Clearly there's Western going on.
Heavy, what was it, man with no name vibes.
Yeah.
Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, it's clearly he's and like I said, he doesn't have a name at this point. Especially at the point where we are, where he's talking to Brown, like there is no name for him. And as the story goes on, you do start to kind of notice that like he hasn't got a name, and so when he does get to Brown, he starts telling a story. And it's clearly a Western. Like, he's calling people dudes. He's got, like, the horse and the guns and, like, just the description of the town. Like, clearly it's a Western. And Tull is basically meant to be, like, the apotheosis of Western towns, like.
That's your tombstone.
Yeah, and so yeah, like he's telling Brown the story about the town he just came from, or basically like his latest adventure or whatever, and it gets pretty fucking dark. Like you immediately find out that not only is this a Western, but
It's so exciting.
there's a fantasy vibe, cause like he meets this girl Allie, and she's an important character, at least while she's there. She's an important character, and she keeps coming up throughout the series. There's a mention of her here and there because, you know, Roland is taken with at least her capabilities in the bedroom, if nothing else. He doesn't think too much of her face and her scars, but that doesn't stop him. But she tells him a story of the character he's been following, the Man in Black. And you find out the Man in Black isn't just some dude that a gunslinger is following. Like, this guy is fucking weird. Roland refers to him as, like, a god, obviously sarcastically, but because he has the capabilities, like, this dude brings someone back to life.
So basically, what Allie tells him is that the Man in Black rolls into town, and essentially, she says he's a sorcerer because a dude dies, and he just straight up brings him back to life, and it's wild.
Yeah, and like, obviously he keeps being referred to throughout the series as like the priest or a priest because he's wearing these black robes. That's why he's the Man in Black. And yeah, he brings this dude back to life, but it's not like he gives a few Hail Marys and crosses him and all that. Like, he hops around all over him, spits on him. Like,
Yeah.
it's like you kind of expect him at a certain point to start pissing on him just because, like, this is just a grotesque, crazy, just...
Reading it almost gives me Exorcist vibes, you know?
Yeah, like, but the priest is the demon instead.
Exactly.
And it's like... So, yeah, like, that's a crazy scene. And then, yeah, like, he brings this dude back to life, but it's kind of a half-life. Like, he's not, like, the dude that they know. He gets way worse. And so, yeah, like, the gunslinger meets this guy, and he's, like, eating the devil grass, and he's got, like, green shit dripping out his mouth, and, like, he's just not really able to hold a conversation. And, yeah, it's quite the introduction to this town is getting this story and everything. And so...
Really quite the introduction to the Man in Black.
Yeah. And, like, obviously, up to this point, he's just been kind of shadow, like, more of a purpose than a character, but now he starts to become a character. And so Roland is in this town now, and not only did he hear the story of that freak show, he hears about this other freak show in town, and that's an interesting character too.
So he hears about... No, most of the town's not really religious, but there's a small group, and they're almost cult-like. And Allie was telling them that their priestess, she doesn't have anything to do with anyone other than she comes down on Sunday. That's it. Preaches and goes back. Secludes herself. And the man who used to be their priest just up and disappeared right before she came. Just out of nowhere. That was crazy. I think it was pretty suspicious.
Yeah. And I mean, she... Obviously, if you're listening to this and you know anything about other Stephen King stories or movies, she's very Margaret Whitish from Carrie. Carrie's mom, like, the crazy... Like, she clearly gives that kind of vibe off. She's the religious fanatic type.
I always think of...
Miss Carmody?
Miss Carmody, thank you. From The Mist. Yeah. Mm.
Well, I mean... At one point, Roland does go to visit or, kind of get a vibe off of this place and listen in on what's going on. So I'm going to, like, there's, Shall We Gather at the River, that classic hymn is being sung, and Roland shows up, and I'm going to read a little bit of this lady's her sermon. And by the way, while we're fucking talking about it, I will say this woman's name, we haven't mentioned her, is Sylvia Pitson is her name. And just putting that out there, the name's not that important, but I'm going to go ahead and read some of this. And so starting at the beginning and kind of skipping around. My dear little brothers and sisters in Christ. It was a haunting line. For a moment, the gunslinger felt mixed feelings of nostalgia and fear, stitched in with an eerie feeling of deja vu, and he thought, I dreamed of this, or I was here before. If so, when? Not Mayhees. Not there. He shook the feeling off. The audience, perhaps 25 all told, had become dead silent. Every eye touched the preacher woman. The subject of our meditation tonight is the interloper. Her voice was sweet and melodious, the speaking voice of a well-trained contralto. I feel, Sylvia Pitson said reflectively, that I know almost everyone in the good book personally. In the last 5 years, I've worn out 3 of them, precious though any book be in this ill world, and uncountable numbers before that. I love the story, and I love the players in that story. I've walked arm in arm with the lion's den, in the lion's den with Daniel. I stood with David when he was tempted by Bethesda, as she bathed at the pool. I have been in the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I slew 2,000 with Samson when he swung the jawbone, and was blinded with St. Paul on the road to Damascus. I wept with Mary at Golgotha. And she goes on and on.
So she's Joel Osteen?
Something like that. I fear the interloper, she says multiple times. And, it kind of goes on with this. He's always been there, my brothers and sisters, but I don't know his mind, and you don't know his mind. Who could understand the awful darkness that swirls there, the pride and the titanic blasphemy, the unholy glee and the madness, the gibbering madness that walks and crawls and wriggles through men's most awful wants and desires? Oh, Jesus, Savior, and rocking and sobbing, the congregation became a sea. The woman seemed to point at all of them, and none of them. It's him that will come as the Antichrist, a crimson king with bloody eyes. And it gets crazier from there until the whole place is riled up. And Roland kind of freaked out a little bit. He leaves. And so that another weird thing is clearly there's the Bible. Character straight from the Bible. Story straight out of the Bible. Clearly it is our Bible. Clearly the interloper is meant to be, the deceiver.
They say the interloper is the devil when they're chanting back and forth.
And so that's the town that he's in at the current moment, which is, creepy and obviously he doesn't really care about this town, and so it's just he only cares about the Dark Tower, but it builds the mystery of this world that he's in is like, once again, like we said, like this could be the future. It's clearly not the past. Could be the future. Could be a different world. I mean, it's all kind of left mysterious and vague, and you're not, I guess, meant to understand. But, like, obviously, is this like a post-apocalyptic world? Clearly it is. That's made clear a little later, that's clearly what's happened. But is this our world? But she's clearly, like we said, a religious fanatic stirring up a bunch of people, and we do get a portion, like you said, the Man in Black being the Man in Black. He's very mysterious as well. So, like, now every character here is mysterious. We have no, the world is mysterious. This is a very strange and weird situation that you find yourself in pretty quickly in this book. You have no idea what's going on. But the story picks up right after that where, the Man in Black had left Alia a letter and, mentioning a number that comes up. And so that's one thing, like we said, we don't know what genre this is. We don't know where the story is going. All we know how weird and strange it is, and now we get basically a spell cast with the number 19.
Yeah, so number 19. If you're a big Stephen King fan, you probably already know significance of this number. If not, then I'm sure you'll learn along the way. And if not, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
So,
it's just kind of put there as a mystery.
Anyway, in the revised edition, he come back and added this.
Yeah, the 19
and it
stuff
makes sense. But, yeah, the number 19. Essentially, he leaves Allie this letter saying that the guy that he brought back to life, if she whispers this number or this word to him, the word 19, then he will tell her what he saw after he died. And he signed it Walter O'Dim.
Yeah. And so now we have a name for the man in black, Walter O'Dim. And obviously, if you're reading along with us, and or if you already know about, Stephen King's multiverse, and you come across this letter in the book, there's other clues as to who this person is, which we won't get too much into now, maybe in a spoiler section or something, but Walter O'Dim is the man in black. We have that. That's pretty much the first clear fact that we learn. And so at this point we have Roland. Basically he's kind of like investigating this town, but with no real clear reason or goal. He's just soaking in some of this town. And this town is sad and depressing and clearly very hopeless, with no kind of prospects or goals or anything. It's just a bleak place. And sadly, the only signs of life is Sylvia Pitson and her crazy congregation.
Or Allie and her horse.
Yeah, or Allie and her horse. And so, moving right along, we get the most brutal scene really in a Stephen King book up to this point, as far as
It's so good.
especially in our reading list. This is worse than anything that happened in Salem's Lot. So Sylvia Pitson, in a fit of rage because of a questionable scene, like, okay, so the demon abortion that happens.
Okay, I feel like you're getting a little ahead because, so by the way, the man in black visited her, Sylvia.
Oh yeah.
And
I didn't mention that
impregnated
part.
her, but not with his child, with a child of the Crimson King.
Yeah, which would a character that's remains a mystery.
Yes.
We'll just leave it at that.
So, upon her telling that to Roland, he's like, yeah, I got a solution for that. Demon baby abortion. Pulls out a gun and ka-chow, gone.
Yeah. And I mean, like, it is not quite necessary to detail a scene as detailed as King does, but like this entire book
I'm not against it. It was pretty great.
I mean, I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just saying this, in 1982, this whole entire book is, he's breaking new ground with just these couple of scenes alone. Not, also we can say he's breaking new ground because this book is just pretty much any genre you can think of is, at least in this series, not necessarily this book, but I guess if you're going there with the crazy hallucinatory mindfuck that happens at the beginning or at the end of this book, then you kind of do have to have a wild story building up to that point. some of the shit that's coming up after this. But yeah, demon abortion. She gets really mad, riles up the entire town this time.
But what's a Western without a big ass shootout?
Yeah, and so it's
one-sided.
It's less of a shootout as much as just a complete slaughter, massacre. Yeah, Roland, or as he's known here so far, the Gunslinger, takes out the entire town of Toll. Man, woman, child, dogs, whatever.
Oh, and when it starts, you see the piano player. I don't remember what his name was. Sheb.
Yeah,
Sheb,
clearly he has
You
some
see
history
him.
with Roland.
Yeah, Roland broke his wrist before, but yeah, you see him holding Allie, like, well, then, like, I believe a knife to her throat.
He has a knife to her throat.
But yeah, and she looks at Roland and says, "I couldn't resist. I whispered the number 19, and I can't handle it."
Yeah, she's gone crazy over it.
So she's mad. So Roland pulls out his guns and shoots her and Sheb through her, kills them, and then people start attacking. So
Sylvia's riling him up, screaming that he killed the interloper and he's the devil and so on and so forth.
Kills them all.
Yeah, and I mean, you can, clearly this is just a sign that Roland will stop at nothing to complete his quest and to continue on. And you can't really blame him much because they are kind of attacking him, but there are other solutions. But this is, Roland is clearly very single-minded, and we can discuss there is a distinction, at least in this book, and kind of going forward in the last book, but we'll get to that when we get there. But in this book, there's a distinction between Roland and the Gunslinger, which we'll be getting to in a minute. But Roland leaves town, and back into the desert he goes, and basically he finds something and immediately passes out. He thinks he sees the man in black at this little way station. There's a couple of buildings, a place to tie up your horse. And he sees someone, he thinks it's the man in black. He's about to start firing his gun, but he can't. Like, he's exhausted. And he passes out. And he wakes up. And it wasn't the man in black.
It was a little boy.
It's a little boy.
Little sandy-haired boy named Jake.
Yep, Jake Chambers, a.k.a. Bama, which is kind of your first sign that, all right, why is he called Bama? And so Roland hypnotizes him, which is a weird thing for a cowboy to be able to do. But I always thought that was kind of cool, the Roland.
Oh, the hand bullet thing? That was so dope.
And he hypnotizes him, gets quite a weird backstory. It's not a weird backstory, it's just a backstory, but in the context of this novel, it's a weird backstory.
It's a weird way to get a backstory.
Oh, yeah, so Jake Chambers, he's got a weird life. As a private school, New York City. It's clearly New York City. He mentions the lady in the water with the crown holding a book and a torch. Like, okay, that's Statue of Liberty. He's on his way to school. He's discussing how, he only knows professional people and so on and so forth. And you get this weird scene where he's standing trying to cross a road and he sees what he straight up says is the man in black, pushes him into the road. He sees a car rolling over him and he's concerned with his scraped knee and whether or not he's going to make it to school on time, even though he's clearly just been run over and died. Like, his balls are squished, he can taste shit in his mouth, there's blood squirted out of his face. Like, it's pretty cool. And then the next thing he knows, he wakes up at this way station where the Gunslinger is. So let's hold on real quick and kind of survey the what we got going here. Is we got the Gunslinger, who's after the man in black, done shot up a whole town, comes across a little boy, you know, ironically, right after he started thinking of his own childhood, because he's in like this sunstroke delirium going through this desert, just exhausted himself.
Yeah, Tony's kind of crazy on that.
Yeah, and so that's a interesting thing to happen. And then not only is this a child he comes across, it's a boy from not his world, and
Of the world.
And like Jake is like, in the original edition he was like 8 or 9, but later on like it's changed to he's like 11 or 12, and he's just had this traumatic experience where he died. He remembers dying. I know the gunslinger asked him, does he want to remember, because he was in this little trance, and he says no, because I could taste shit in my mouth.
Yeah, and so he kind of does the bullet thing again.
And like he had to take like kind of a...
Makes him go to sleep and does it in a way where he will not remember any of the things that were brought up.
Yeah, and so, after this, we're at this point where Jake is really the deepest character at this point, where he's the one we kind of know the most about, but, we're about to learn a lot about Roland here in this next part, but we got this mysterious world that he lives in, or is at least existing in at this point, and we're not sure how old he is or like really what his backstory is, other than he's from this line of gunslinger. We kind of hear mentions of a figure called Arthur Eld at one point, which is he asked him, do you have like King Arthur or something, and him and Jake kind of have that back and forth where that's a thing that they both know about, but it's not really the same, which is we'll get deeper into that going forward, but it's an interesting little tidbit that gets dropped in, and this is what King is really good at with this world building. It's all kind of nonchalant and not thrown at your face. He just kind of lets things drop here and there and describes things in a certain way where it's really about the environment and the vibe that he gives. And there's like these, all through the book you get these mythical images, like basically Stonehenge here coming up in a minute. There's just, this epic desert, like it's the biggest desert ever. He's clearly like this man with no name, Clint Eastwood like figure. It's just very epic, just in tone, which is, I guess, is what really allows him to just kind of, he set up the scenario where he can just say things and it just kind of adds to the scope of the story without really him having to dig too deep into it. But it just like leaves little seeds where you can even tell like this is going to come up again later, which is what comes up shortly, where they come across, like I just said, like a Stonehenge like situation. But before we get there, they have to leave, and they go down in the cellars, and that's where this story really goes from just Western weirdness to straight up fantasy. Like he comes across.
So, fantasy.
Yeah.
This story, very tokenish vibes.
Like
in many regards. And I'm going to bring up two. My first point being that it's really setting up the beginning of an epic journey on a Tolkien scale. He was very influenced by Lord of the Rings, and you can really tell he's trying to make his own epic. And man, this is a good start.
I mean, it's really like the scope of it is clearly on a Tolkien level, but he also has like the world building with there's like their own little high speech language thing going on. Like they got their own slang, so that like builds on the culture and adds to the weirdness in one way. And he's clearly like a mythic figure, like we mentioned before when we were discussing Roland. He is kind of a mix of like Clint Eastwood, like we said, and Aragorn.
Yeah. All right, which our second point, I'll get back with. We'll get to that in a little bit.
But so at this point, like I said, it does turn to fantasy, really. Like as before, we just got like a weird little western. Now it turns to fantasy because they come across this demon in the cellar. They're going down to try to get the food and the water before they leave because, like you said, there's just miles and miles of desert. Like we don't know the next time we're gonna come across this. Strange enough, a water pump that's still running, and it mentions not on electricity and not, It
said the electricity died long ago.
I mean, like a battery would have ran out. But then he mentions it's probably an atomic slug, which just brings up more questions about like when and what world is this? This is weird. And now there's a demon down there. He's talking in a strange way. He mentions like, go slow past the drawers, and it's a weird little conversation they have, and Roland's kind of sick and tired of it. He reaches in and ends up pulling out a
jawbone.
Like a jawbone from what seems to be some kind of at least humanoid thing. We don't know, because there's like back at camp with Brown, they mentioned something called a Birdman walking around. He mentions calling it a Tahine, which is like, what the fuck? And anyways, so yeah, like this is just another example of that. Like it's just weird shit like that. Demons apparently just pop up.
Yeah.
Which, and shortly after leaving that one behind, obviously they kind of trek through the desert. They pretty shortly thereafter start seeing like grass, and they can see that there's trees, and they've been seeing some mountains in the distance over here that they're coming up to. And so like you get these small hills, and there's like these it's basically Stonehenge. There's like these standing stones,
just kind of in a circle.
Yeah, and it that's kind of cool to me. I like that kind of world building. Like, what is this?
Yeah, we'd have been all up in that.
Yeah, and so weirdly enough, I guess we can say, like I said, there's another demon here, but Jake just kind of wanders right over, and something kind of attacks him in a weird, like there's a strange incident, and Roland has to like get this kid out of there. Just go ahead and say put it the way that you put it.
So this is the point in our story where our hero decides that he's got to take drugs, hang out with this 11-year-old child until the drugs kick in, then leave him at camp while he goes and gets some poltergeist pussy.
Yeah, and that's basically what happens. But other than this, he doesn't just give himself away freely. Like he prostitutes himself out to this demon slut thing.
Oh no, it's literally a fucking battle.
Yeah, that is one way to put it. He gets his information though. At least he gets some information. It's a
back and forth.
Basically, what the information he gets is that the child, Jake, is his door to the man in black. And the man in black is his door to... He mentions there's basically put it there's a dude addicted to heroin, some chick that he really can't see very well. Yeah, he can't really tell much about that. And then death but not for you, Gunslinger. And then he's like, alright, I don't know what the fuck any of that really means, but I guess you kind of did your side of the deal, but like, you can still go fuck yourself after, I guess, you get done with me. And then that's obviously, in my terms, not his. It's much more poetic in the book. But that's still the basic thing that happened is he fucked a demon to get some information. Once again, showing that
King really knew where he was going with this.
Roland will do anything to get to his dark tower, because apparently these three figures or whatever are his road to the Dark Tower. So after that little thing, we get a flashback, which is fun because this is the point where we kind of figure out like why Roland is softening. Obviously, he's still referred to as the Gunslinger, but in this flashback, he is referred to as Roland, and he's quite young. He's about like 12, 13, 14 years old.
He's not quite a gunslinger yet at this point, is he?
Yeah, he's still in gunslinging school, and that's when we meet some of his friends and his teachers, and so
Yes, Roland had homies.
we get several names. We get his father's name, Stephen. He's basically the King Arthur figure, I guess. He's kind of the leader of he's the head of the the Knights of the Round Table, as it were. And then we got a castle. There's lords and ladies. This is very, fairy tale, true epic fantasy style, except instead of swords and sorcery, we got horses and guns.
They're cowboys.
Which is just super cool to me, but
Yeah, it's dope, man.
I like it. In this scenario, we meet mainly his friend Cuthbert, and that's basically his running buddy. Cuthbert is kind of the mirror opposite version of Roland, whereas Roland is, not really able to think around corners. He just kind of hacks through everything. He's
straight to business.
Very pragmatic and just what is the straight answer.
He's very serious.
Yeah. Cuthbert is a joker. He's a creative thinker. His main he is the Joker. He cracks jokes. He's the quintessential we've met Cuthbert before in other King's novels. Not before our reading list, but just in other King novels, you get that quirky, joking sidekick guy. He's the trash mouth of this book. And King fans will understand what I mean by that.
You'll love the character.
Yeah. Yeah, he's super fun. Cuthbert is, like I said, he's just as good as Roland, really. He doesn't last as long as Roland, but that's for future.
Well, obviously, he's the last gunslinger.
Yeah, but we'll get to all that later. But at this point, we just, that it's his best friend. It's what they refer to as Ka babies, and I guess we'll get more into Ka later once we start wrapping things up and just hashing the end out or whatever. But it's basically, his first friend and the one he's grown up with and learned with. And in this scenario, they end up seeing a hanging together. They are such good friends as outside of their classes, which we meet Court, which is
kind of their teacher.
He's the main instructor,
he's
I guess.
Gunslinger that's in charge of teaching all the young ones and testing them, which we'll get to.
Yeah. But at this point, we see that they're also in good with the
cook.
The cook is, obviously he's been there and hanging out with them and everything. But
he gives them extra scraps and shit, without people knowing. Not often, but some.
Yeah, he's just there.
They like to go hang out behind, I think it was behind a column or something.
Yeah.
And eat.
But in this case, they hear some shit they shouldn't have heard, or I don't know if shouldn't have heard is the right way to put it, but
they overheard something that wasn't meant for them.
Yeah, so Hex, the cook, is in cahoots with a rebellion
He's a traitor.
And it's really very vague in this book as what's really going on, but you hear about this guy named John Farson who's they call him the good man. They basically mention he has all the talents of JFK but none of the morals, or however that they put it, which is fucking a weird way to put it, but there is, they have the same phrase like, we shall do for the good man as the good man has done for you, which is, obviously rings of JFK. But so Hax is a traitor.
Yeah, so with his father being who he is, Roland had to tell him what he heard.
He thinks at this point, I could kill him. I could have killed them both, and it's kind of like him questioning whether or not he should have. But yeah, he ends up telling his father, and he tells him he wants to watch it when they hang him.
So
Cuthbert follows along.
Yeah, Roland and Cuthbert actually show up before the hanging, before the crowd, and go and hang out on the podium
and the gallows.
And Roland takes a splinter of wood from it and puts it in his pocket and keeps it.
Yeah. So remember that.
Strange.
But yeah, they end up watching this guy get hung, and he kind of stays true to his cause to the very end. Like, he doesn't beg for mercy or really cry out in much of any way, other than just, say a few words about his cause and all of that. And like, so it is an interesting, kind of vibe that this story, or this particular part of the story, gives compared to what we've gotten so far. And like, Roland is clearly a different guy, but you can tell that this is the point in his childhood where he started to change. And then we get back to Roland and Jake, and they're going into these mountains, and pretty quickly they come across the man in black. He shows up and talks some shit, basically, is what happens. Roland immediately tries to shoot him, but that doesn't work, and
fires 3 shots and they all miss.
Yeah, he just rubs it in his face, and
which
basically
doesn't happen often unless he's shooting at the man in black.
Yeah. And he talks a little shit and tells him that he'll see him on the other side of these mountains alone.
Yeah, basically tells him that Jake's gonna die.
No, Jake's not gonna make it to the other side. And so, yeah, that kind of does cast a gloom over the rest of their little journey here and into the mountains. Much like, they follow in the tradition of some of our favorite
point number 2
fantasy characters, into the mines.
They call it a mine. A mine!
So, yeah, in tradition of many fantasy and other epic stories, especially Lord of the Rings, they decide to go underground instead of over.
Yeah, there's this tunnel, and they just go. I mean, that's where the man in black disappears into.
I mean, it makes perfect sense in this one.
Yeah, but
it's still,
but yeah,
it's a trope though.
Yeah, it's very much along the same lines, and yeah, it's quite dark, and Jake is afraid. He's especially afraid now. He didn't like what the man in black had to say.
No, I wouldn't either.
And it kind of is at this point where Roland stops thinking of Jake as Jake and starts thinking of him as the boy.
Yeah.
Which, as a reader, adds a lot more gloom to the already gloominess that had been cast before. And so, which is, it seems correct since they are in the dark now, that the tone of the novel kind of follows the setting, which is pitch black. And so Roland ends up thinking some more about his childhood, which we just gone over, and we get some more of that where he so like we said, this Stephen is kind of the King Arthur, and King Arthur had Merlin. And this way Stephen had Martin.
And Martin was a dick.
That's one way to put it.
And so Martin was actually making the moves on Roland's mama. Stephen's wife, which is pretty fucked up, and she was entertaining it. which is more fucked up.
Yeah, Gabriel was dancing with Martin right in front of Steven at like balls and shit. And
Just straight cucking this man.
Yeah. And I mean, Steven's off fighting a war at this point, like we mentioned with John Farson and his rebellion. Like that's all going on. And, you know, so Roland does, like, he kind of knows, but doesn't really know until short, like, this happens where he
catches him, and then
Martin starts talking shit.
yeah, just gets him all riled up, gets him so mad that he goes and challenges Court to become a gunslinger.
Yeah, and so Court tries to make, like, even though Court is hard as fuck.
Oh,
Like,
he's a hard ass.
Yeah, he's a granite stone man, but even he was like, bro, like don't
come
do
on,
this.
man, don't do this. Like, you don't want this.
Like, I have to follow the rules when you challenge me like this, but please don't, like, not yet. Like, we'll do this in a year, and, you know. And then Roland's like, no, let's do this right now. And he goes and gets a hawk. And this is a hawk. His name is David. He'd been friends with him. He's trained with him. This one is kind of an older one. It's almost time for him to be retired anyways.
Kind of ornery.
But Roland had built a little relationship over time with him. And yeah, like, this is going to be his weapon. And he straight up uses this hawk as a weapon.
Yeah, he just tells it to attack. He attacks, and then Roland goes over there while Court's down, getting, his face all fucked up.
Like, he had to punch this thing 3 times against his own face as hard as he could to get this thing to die. And it still doesn't really die. It's still tearing his arm and hand up as it's falling to the ground. Like, this dude is, his eyes all hanging out. Like, he is fucked up at this point. And Roland just
comes and takes his weapon and just says, submit or die.
And yeah, like, he's knocked him over. He's about to pound him as much as he can. But so, like, this is a pretty epic scene and a pretty brutal battle. Like, it's not obviously quite as bad as Toll.
No.
But it's pretty bloody for just a one-on-one fight. It's a really one-sided fight, which is crazy. But even at that point, Court's like, all right, like, you proved your point. You're an apprentice now. You can move forward, get your guns and everything, but don't go after the wizard, dude. Like, don't do it.
Yeah, don't do that.
And then once again, returning back to the Gunslinger and Jake under the mountain. It's like I said, Jake is like crawling along because it's dark and they really can't see much. Like they keep like lighting, little lights, but it doesn't really. They're seeing like oil pumps and just weird mechanic stuff.
Yeah,
That's
odd machinery that they've never seen. Just very odd, very peculiar.
Jake's able to understand some of it, but
not much. He's 11, man.
yeah. But he comes across one thing that he does understand, which is a handcart. And he even kind of chastises Roland for not knowing what it is. It's like, it's a handcart, like from the old cartoons. Like, what? But
exactly. And so they use the handcart.
And they speed right along at this point, and so they're making good time. But they come across something that once again.
So we've had. It's been fantasy, but it's been heavy Western up to this point, right? Well, now it's time for some sci-fi. Like, we're getting some mutants coming in.
Yeah, and
The slow mutants.
They're like they're humanoid. They're kind of like zombie creature things. It's a weird mutant take on zombies. It's kind of hard to tell exactly. Their description their description and their behavior is basically a zombie, but it's
Very zombie-ish, yeah.
but it's is there a zombie movie where it's like radiation that causes them? Because that's basically what's happened here.
Is it like 28 weeks later? But there were more like
That was more like a
was
disease.
rage. There was rage.
That was like a yeah. But yeah, like it's a strange thing, and they just get attacked by loads of them, and Roland does his thing.
Yeah, he saves Jake, protects Jake.
Yeah, Jake gets a couple of good whacks in himself, but it's basically just Jake trying to make sure the cart doesn't get too crazy off course or anything, while Roland's just doing basically what he did in Tull, except this time you don't quite feel as bad about what he's doing. But
You don't feel as bad about enjoying what he's doing.
yeah, but yeah, like it works and they get through it, and soon after that they come up out of the mountain, and once again they come across the Man in Black. Mike, do you like Jake?
Yeah, I like Jake.
That's too damn bad!
What do you mean? That's too bad.
Well, I mean, he dies.
Well, I mean, I'm a Game of Thrones fan, so I guess I'm over it.
Well, yeah, so sorry to just put that right there in your face like that, but yeah, that is what happens. They come across the Man in Black, and yeah, Jay gets sacrificed for the Dark Tower. It's his second sacrifice.
So Roland essentially has a choice because the Man in Black flees and Jake's in a predicament. And he can either save Jake or go after the Man in Black. And he felt that his duty to the tower was stronger than his love for Jake. So, yeah, he went after the Man in Black.
And I mean, we'll take a step back here for a second. Since we just raced into that little incident, there is that, like, he did love Jake, or he was, he did realize at one point that he was, falling in love with this kid. Like, he was a good friend, he cared for him, he wanted to protect him, but he felt sorry for him because it's like, what the fuck situation are you in? It's probably seemingly worse than mine. At least Roland has guns. But that is he kind of knew that, like, not to get too close. So, like, even before the Man in Black started teasing him with this, like, the kid's not gonna make it type of, he kind of already knew that, like,
He doesn't like getting close to people anyway. I mean, look at the last person he was close to, Allie. It doesn't work out well.
And I mean, at this point, it kind of does. He mentions his mother, his father, Cuthbert. He had other friends like Elaine, and I think you mentioned Jamie in this one. I don't know. Jamie is another friend that comes up later. Anyways, he mentioned Court. He did kind of care for Hax, but Hax is a traitor.
They loved Hax up until they heard that, and then they really still did. They didn't really change their feelings towards him. They just did what they had to do.
And like we said, like, this is King started writing this in 1970, and he was like right around 19 at that point or some shit.
Yeah.
And he started writing it on a bright green ream of paper, and it was just some short stories at that point, and this is a fix-up novel, and even at that point, like we said, we're reading a revised version. The even in the original edition, which I read, like, one of the main themes here is Roland is straight up about, like, sacrificing for, the sacrificing for the tower. Like, that's what he wants to do. He wants to get to the tower.
He serves the tower.
Yeah, and anything that gets in his way, even this kid who he loves, like, fuck it, he's going for the tower. And, like, Roland is, like, just a granite rock. Like, he's hard as fuck. Like, you don't really see much emotion in him. Like, he's just
very stoic.
He just basically walked over this kid and straight on towards the Man in Black. And so now we've lost Jake, and Jake does... It's one of the most iconic lines from this series. Go then, there are other worlds than these, which is, it's like, what the fuck does that mean? And this kid's dying, and it's just like, what?
I don't know, but I'm interested.
yeah, exactly. It's just it's another thing that just grabs you, and like, at this point, if you're, not into it, I get it. But at this point, when I was reading it, like, I was already hooked way before this. But this is, like, at this point, like, I'm...
The
like
tool slaughter got me.
Alright, but I'm like 14 years old reading this book for the first time, just laying in my bed. I got school in the morning, it's already after midnight, and I'm like, I'm like, nope, I gotta finish this. Like, I gotta keep going at this point.
He slaughters kids, he fucks demons. This is great.
But I mean, if you're not into it, then you should at least stick around for the next books in that series. But because I mean, this one is it's a pretty bleak and dark beginning.
It is. It's very different. A lot of people don't really get into this one, and honestly, I actually read book 2 before I read this one, and I went back, and you need to read this one. Like, you can't skip it. You really need it. But trust me, if it's not for you and you just got through it, don't turn away from the Dark Tower because of it. Like, keep going, give it a try, because book 2 is completely different and it is wild.
But yeah, like, at this point, I could understand if you're reading this far and all you've gotten is a town getting slaughtered, some crazy desert dwellers that didn't really make sense, and just talked about some bleak, dark shit. A bunch of depressed townsfolk that got slaughtered, like I said.
Some mutants.
Crazy religious folk that, like, starts a cult. There's just a kid that's died already and apparently dies again now. And so we got 2 kid deaths in this book, and it's the same kid dying twice. And I understand if you get to this point where, like, you start caring about this kid and you don't want him to die again, but look, there he is. And your main character's the one that,
There's
like...
a pattern, though.
Yeah. And I mean, even the backstory, like, a bird gets destroyed on a guy's face. There's, like, a wizard cucking, like, this dude's father, and he wants to, like, kill him about it, and, like... Yeah, I could totally understand, like, just the brutality of this. Apparently, Court is like a huge-ass dude that was basically trying to beat this kid to death, or at least beat him into submission. You do see him punch him in the face. Doesn't Cuthbert get punched in the face, too? I don't remember.
I think it's, like, smacked in the back of the head.
Yeah, and, like... So, yeah, like, I could understand it, even if you are a King fan, and this... Because... One thing we do want to highlight about Stephen King is that like, most of his books are full of hope, even if there are, like, some dark, creepy child murdering bits in some of his stories. Like, it's still essentially about hope and family and friends and community and getting through trouble. But this book,
like, it's not.
It's not that.
It's just a setup for.
I mean, really, yeah, it's just a prologue to the overall series, really. But, so, like, yeah, after this kid falls to his death, he catches the Man in Black, what the whole book was about. And so, we get to the Man in Black, and at this point in the story, the Man in Black is mostly mysterious. Like, you see that he's clearly crazy and kind of a dick, and you're not really entirely sure what he could know or why he should know it, but you're being led to believe that this guy has all the answers. Even the fucking demon, the fucking demon, said that, like, this is your way forward. You have to get to him. Now you understand why he said the boy is the door to. So clearly the rest of it must be true too. And so this entire time you're being led to believe that this guy has the answers, and he has at least some answers. But we get to this another epic scenery situation. We've gotten the Stonehenge, basically. We've gotten these epic mountain and the tunnels underneath the mountain, the mines. We've gotten castle scenery, like lords and ladies scenery. We've got
A lot of desert.
a big old lot of
Saloon
desert.
town.
Yeah, old western saloon town with we did get a fucking bar scene, like a good old saloon fight scene.
But now, just a good old fashioned campfire.
Yeah,
You know, in the middle of a pit completely full of animal bones and skulls.
It's a Golgotha. It's just a big, yeah. And we, strangely enough, get a tarot card reading, and just the crazy, like all of that seemed crazy. Like this is the craziest scene in the whole book because it's just.
It doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's very interesting. It's cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of deep thought going on, but
it doesn't really, it doesn't feel like it really leads you anywhere. But
it's just the Man in Black talking a big game, like just, bragging about some of the shit that he knows is basically all that's happening.
Exactly.
But it's super interesting, like I said, but Roland doesn't necessarily get everything that he wants, but he does get his like I said, his tarot card reading, which talks about, once again, we get the prisoner, which is apparently the heroin addict. But Roland doesn't quite understand that, like the reader understands what's being said there.
And then the two-faced lady.
We get the Lady of the Shadows, which is like it's two-faced lady, and we're assuming that's the second figure. And then once again we get the phrase "death, but not for you, Gunslinger." So clearly the third thing, in whatever they keep mentioning, the drawers, and he says the drawing, and so like, well, what is that? Like, that's left mysterious. He's drawing cards. Is that what he's saying? Like, it's not really made clear in this book exactly what's being said, but apparently death is happening. We just saw some death with Jake, and that's still on your mind during all of this. That's still on Roland's mind during all of this, because it literally just happened a minute ago. And so, like that whole situation casts a pall over this tarot card reading, their little palaver. So what is the main thing you got out of this? Their little meeting. That's what this whole book has been about, is their meeting. So did it seem to pay off to you anyway?
Yeah, one thing from the jump, like from the very beginning, Roland makes a comment about he'll kill him, and the Man in Black immediately just says, "No, you won't. You can't." Like, he makes it clear right then. His confidence, he knows that Roland is no match for him. Roland, I feel, knows this at the moment.
At least he feels
and
that.
It's just two adversaries sitting down and coming to an understanding and just having a discussion, and it's awesome. But the scope of the world, from the dream that Roland has at the end of the Palavar.
I mean, it's just some of the shit that the Man in Black says to him is just
just how mind-boggling and eye-opening it is for Roland, and reading that and seeing that, experiencing that through him,
mm-hmm.
it is wonderful.
Just some of the imagery that comes to mind with some of the things that the Man in Black was saying, or Walter O'Dim was saying, which he does kind of figure out that he has been to, the same places that Roland's been to. He knows a lot more, like, it's not really made clear about their relationship before, like they've known each other, like he knew, what was going on, because, Roland has been following him for, you're not really sure how long, you're not really sure how long Roland's been out on his own, or how long ago the Gilead fell.
Yeah,
like, you're just kind of vague. Yeah, you're just kind of left with this sense that, like, this has been going on for a while, but that may or may not be true. Like, it's left really vague, but clearly they have some kind of history that's not really gone deep into, but Martin Broadcloak's brought up, like, they apparently known each other. He refers to Legion, and like there's a lot of things that the Man in Black just brings up and drops into the conversation, and even some of Roland's replies. Like, some things are cleared up, but really, like, you get a lot more questions, from this conversation than any kind of answers. And I think that's true about Roland, too, is he has a lot more questions at the end. And, like, they end up going to sleep around the campfire. Roland wakes up, and what does he find?
Isn't he aged like 10 years or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, slept for 10 years, man.
And there's some skeletons beside him. He's not really sure if that's the Man in Black, or maybe it's just a trick by the Man in Black.
Yeah,
it's
ambiguous.
Yeah, which is one way to say that this is a big old cliffhanger where you're left with a lot more questions than answers, and you're not sure, because of everything that's come before, you're not really sure what's going to come next.
Hey guys, so if you like what you're seeing here, then check out our page, like and subscribe, like this video, share. Check us out on Facebook. Anything I missed?
Yeah, I mean, we got the Strange Creation Facebook page.
Oh, I guess it should have been more specific.
That's Strange Creation Co. But then there's also the People's History of Horror podcast. And that's its own Facebook page. And soon we're going to be putting up Blunt Talk.
Oh, and your blog.
Oh yeah, it's the People's... No, it's not. It's the Strange Creation Literary blog. And there's also... We're going to be soon bringing up Instagram and TikTok and all the other shit, but we haven't quite got there yet.
We'll definitely be sharing those as soon as we get them.
But don't forget to go look at our Patreon page. It's patreon.com, Strange Creation Code. And we haven't really set up the subscription yet. We'll be doing that. And so either way, like, share, and subscribe. All of the things that we've mentioned.